Welcome. We've moved from West Africa now to the South Pacific down in Oceania. And we're going to be looking at Papua New Guinea in general each week, but with specific focus on the Chambri people who live in the Sepik River Basin. In addition to this introduction, I've included a link to what is a classic movie, an art film that looks at tourism in the Sepik region. It's called Cannibal Tours. Trust you'll watch that. It's on YouTube. And then also created a link using Google Maps to show you where the Chambri live, and you can zoom in and out of that. What I'd like to do today is to introduce to you a little bit about Papua New Guinea in general, its history, and then a little bit about the Chambri, more specific. Papua New Guinea is one half of the island of New Guinea. It's immediately north of Australia. And why it's half of the island and not the whole will come up in a minute. It's part of an island region, as you can see here, we know that there has been trade, we know that there have been relationships between all these peoples. The people of Papua New Guinea, specifically I'm going to call Melanesians, different than Tongans, Fijians, Samoans, who are part of that, part of the eastern part of the islands. But they, at times in the distant past, were ocean-going people. Migrations happened into this area somewhere between 20 and 50,000 years ago, so they've been there quite a while. Well, the history of New Guinea, the island of New Guinea, or Papua New Guinea, the Indonesians, or the Dutch, were trading on the western half of the island. Germans came and began trading on the northern shore of the east half of the island. The British, coming up from Australia, were on the southern part of the island. And so they were early on in the 18th century, particularly the 19th century, had these claims on the coast, but they really didn't do much going very far into the interior, because when you, along the coast, there's this kind of flat line that eventually gives rise to these very high mountains. And they were under the impression there really wasn't much up in those mountains, that they were impenetrable. So by 1886, we have the territories of British Papua, the southern half, where that line is drawn on these maps, and the territory of German New Guinea, which was on the northern half. Papua, fuzzy-haired, New Guinea, because it wasn't Guinea, it was New Guinea. So the fate of language. So they shared these territories with a very distinct marks between them. Same time, there was a lot of contact in the area. You can see here some of the whaling grounds that were being used in the 19th century. We know at the same time the Yankee whalers were running up the coast. They were also whaling here in these coasts, in these waters, and so there was contact between Europeans and some Americans and the people who lived in the islands and on the coast. With whaling came other forms of trade, copra plantations and things like that. It wasn't until the early 1900s that people began to explore inland. The details of this map are less important than you can see some traces of expeditions, generally following river passages inland, including the Sepik up there. So people were looking, they were exploring, they were looking for resources, looking to exploit resources that they could be exported to their host countries and their supporters, merchants, if you will. Late in the 19th century, late 1800s, we also have history of missions. The Lutherans landed out near Finschhofen, but you've got Sacred Heart Mission, Roman Catholics, the London Missionary Society down near Port Moresby, Society of the Blessed Virgin, and others. So uh, along with the whalers, along with the explorers, along with the claiming of territory, came missionaries. The Lutheran missionaries, for example, were German, and they were in German New Guinea. The London Missionary Society is an English missionary society, and so they're where the British were. In the 20s and 30s, after World War I, we had some more significant journeys inland, and I'll link you up to a video in a week or two that shows one of these expeditions. But they were going inland. They were looking for gold primarily, and this is where they began to get into some of the mountainous regions. And you can see that because right through the middle of this island, there's a real sharp spine of mountains that they're exploring. The other thing that is happening here is the British took over control of the north half of the island. World War I, the Germans lost control of the north, so the British were managing the territory of Papua and the territories of New Guinea. Later, they became just Papua New Guinea. Here you see some of the provinces, and what we're going to be focusing on for the next few weeks is the East Sepik province. It's up in the province. It's up in the north. It's an area that's drained by this large Sepik River, and so it's not a lot of mountains, mostly flat, with a lot of swamp, a lot of river, a lot of really wet ground. And you can see from this map, from the distance, that you've got the mountains down the center of the island, and then up where the East Sepik is, there's very little elevation feature. It's largely flat compared to what else is going on there in the center of the island. Here's some general information. You can read this, but independence came in 1975. This is relatively late in the move from colonial occupation to an independent nation. It's part of the British Commonwealth, the country of Papua New Guinea. It's estimated that there are about 700 languages, and each language represents a distinct culture. You may have families of languages and people speaking related languages, different dialects, but very distinct languages nonetheless, and so very, very diverse. As I said, remember the British Commonwealth? They elect a parliament who elects a prime minister, and through that, all of the things there. This is the country's flag. You've got the bird of paradise. There are over 40 different kinds of birds of paradise in Papua New Guinea. And then you've got the Southern Cross there that Australia brought along. The people of Papua New Guinea, as a part of the British Commonwealth, speak English. Um, uh, but they also speak something called Tokpisin. M1 Palakain Takal Sam. Suppose you got Sabi Long Dispilla, you can sit down and talk to one kind of line. They also speak local languages, and that's where the 700 comes in. So one of the problems or the challenges to education is what language do you educate in? So what they did in 1990 was a major reform of language and study. And so the first 3 years of school, K through 2, are done in the local language that people speak. And then they switch over to English at grade 3. And in the educational process, then they the kids are learning by rote in schools, and until grade 6, when they take a national exam. And in that exam, then it's decided who is able to go on for further schooling and who becomes a school leader. Grade 8, they take another exam. Grade 10, grade 12. So the number of people that go to high school and the number of people who go to university is very, very small. Part of this is just practical. There are not many jobs for highly educated people. So they want people to be literate. They want people to be able to engage in trade and participate in that, but but they also want to encourage people to stay in the local communities, just because the cities are becoming overcrowded and there's less opportunity for people there. They'll live in more poverty in the cities than they would in the village, where they can grow their own gardens. The Chambri, as I said, live in the East Sepik province. And they speak Chambri. There are three villages that are together known as Chambri. They're mentioned in the book: Endagai, Wambon, and Kilibet. When now these people they've lived together on islands in Lake Chambri. Then they left those islands in a bit. They had traded goods with the Iatmo, and their trade was complementary. The Chambri were a large fishing community. They'd catch the fish, they'd trade them with the Iatmo, and they would receive sago, a root vegetable, in return. When the first Chambri came, or the first contact with Chambri, there were about 1,000 people there. Now they're up around 3,000. But in this trading relationship with the Iatmo got a hold of weapons. They also got a hold of other commodities that the explorers were bringing in. And so after a while, they cut off the Chambri. They began to fight with them. They didn't need them as partners anymore. And so the Chambri became vulnerable. They left the islands so that they could protect their community from the rising Iatmo military. And they only came back in 1927 because when peace was restored by colonial authorities. So we've got an example of where the introduction of European material culture changes things in a negative way, but then also in a peaceful way creates something for the folk. Margaret Mead spent some time with the Chambri, or the Chambuli, and the work that Deborah Gewirtz and Ed Frederick Arrington do builds on her research in some ways. And we'll get into that as we get farther into the I showed you this a couple of weeks ago, and I want to bring it back here because what this book is about. The book, the style of writing, it's an ethnography. It's writing about a culture. The earlier book we read was a novel. This is the book we're reading now by Gewirtz and Arrington is based on research. And I just want to point out to you that, as I mentioned, when change occurs for the Chambri, whether it's a change in terms of balance of power with the Iatmo, or with the Europeans, or with tourists, or with colonial powers, those changes affect all other parts of society. And so bear that in mind as you read when the opening of the book, the selling of the drums, the planning of the men's initiation, all of those things, everything that happens, every change that occurs is going to have an effect on the entire web of the community. That has to do with their economic strategies, how they make a living. It has to do with what they think about how they organize themselves, who makes decisions and when. And it also has to do with gender. Let me say something about those three things. Economic strategies in the past, the Chambri were subsistence gardeners and fishermen. They would hunt and gather the resources they had available, plant some small gardens, and then use trading with the Iatmo and others to acquire the resources that they needed. I'm going to talk a little bit later this week about the way this economic activity, political organization relates to gender. And so stay tuned for that. I'll give you this as a start.